Hi everyone, I'm Tally, this is Farrell and we're bored of it, and welcome to our review of Vantage, a Stonemaier game like no other. An open world cooperative game for 1 to 6 players. It's clearly inspired by board games such as Seventh Continent or Sleeping Gods and video games like Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild.
So you'll crash on an uncharted planet and you'll be given that planet to explore. And while you will be given some minor direction, really the journey is kind of up to you. It's very much what you make of it because you have so much freedom to do what you want. Now, before we get into it all, it should be noted that we're not going to really do anything to avoid spoilers. If in such a non-linear game you can consider there to be spoilers, but some people will care about that. But we're also not going to talk about anything in detail, just generally. We're not going to mention card 412 and what's on that response or anything like that. And the last thing is that this is a review copy provided by the publisher.
One thing that may surprise some is that Vantage is not a campaign game. Each session is a self-contained experience, with the only thing carried over being your knowledge. Each game begins with the players getting a random mission and then they are randomly spread across the map. The game is played through Vantages. Each player has a card in front of them which shows their first-person viewpoint. On each card there will also be a list of actions and a list of directions a player can travel in. On each turn, a player can take one action, which may come from their Vantage card, it may come from their tableau, like on equipment, or it may come through travelling to an adjacent card. Actions are categorised into certain types, like look or engage actions, which are colour-coded. You'll almost always be asked to roll a number of challenge dice in order to take the action, which then need to be allocated accordingly into your tableau. And any unallocated dice will result in the loss of a stat, matching the dice face of which you were unable to allocate. The key feature here is that you will always succeed in your action, it's just that any loss of stat reflects the difficulty of taking the action. You can also spend skill tokens in order to reduce the number of challenge dice that you roll as long as they match the colour of the action you're trying to take. Once all of the dice are taken care of, another player will read a passage to you from the respective book, telling you what happened by taking that action. Generally, you'll start off by trying to complete your mission. However, players may gather destinies, which can be thought of as secondary missions. It's really up to players when they end the session, but typically you will end it once you've completed your mission, or once you've completed a destiny after completing a mission for what's called an epic victory. It's really up to players how much they want to continue, and it's pretty freeform as to how much you explore. However, the game can also end once one of the players' stats reaches 0. Vantage is an interesting game, and it's quite unlike anything else from Stonemaier games. It has clear points of inspiration. We think one of its greatest strengths is how it improves upon aspects of those games. We bounced pretty hard off of Seventh Continent because it's an exploration game that doesn't let you explore. It had some intriguing elements, only to slap you in the face for daring to try and investigate them, among other poor design choices.
So what Vantage does brilliantly is that when you explore, you never have to stress about what will happen because you'll always succeed. It's just the cost. And it's actually a breath of fresh air to have a system where you always get to do what you want, but you still manage to feel challenged based upon the actions you're doing. And this is because when you take actions, the dice you allocate, they generally can only go on certain places in your tableau if they've been gained through certain actions. So based upon your setup, you'll be better at some actions and worse at others. And this means that you have skills and you have things you're bad at, and it is kind of nice that you can still feel a challenge while always knowing that you will succeed, because maybe you will have to allocate a lot of dice and your stats will go down.
Probably the most important thing to consider with Vantage is what you want out of your exploration games. This is a completely freeform, low pressure, low story, use your own imagination experience. You can go anywhere, set your own goals and just have fun with it. However, to some extent, this does put pressure on players to create their own story. So if you prefer something with a narrative driving force, you may end up feeling a bit listless here.
So while it's important to say we both enjoyed playing Vantage and we greatly enjoyed exploring the world, Vantage isn't a game that deeply resonates with us. And I think in part that's because of how the, you could say, story is laid out through small snippets of text. And I think that there's both a pro and a con to having such small snippets of text when you take an action on what's read. Because on one hand, when it's small, it keeps the game dynamic, fast moving. It means that you're not getting bogged down. And the text does do very well at kind of setting the scene with just a small little bit of text. On the other hand, it means that it often comes across as quite sanitized and emotionless. And it's hard to get into the adventure when it's so at arm's length, if that makes sense.
That said, for people that do have that imagination and love for freedom of exploration and freedom to create your own story, Vantage will be a revelation. We've seen a lot of people be exceptionally positive on this point, and we understand that completely.
There's such a wealth of replayability in this box, and with something like nearly 800 location cards, you're not going to very often be repeating yourself, and there's going to be dozens and dozens of hours of unique experiences. And this is helped, and the unique experiences are prolonged by the fact that you can generally only do one action per Vantage card per game. So this means that even if you do find yourself in a location you've been before, you have all those other options to try out that you didn't on previous plays. And for our part, we've probably put something like 30 hours into Vantage, and there is so much content we haven't scratched the surface of.
The exploration is great fun, and you can end up experiencing things beyond the core gameplay loop, such as games within the game, brain-burning puzzles, and new mechanisms you didn't expect. So it's far from a one-trick pony.
Turning to things that could be perceived as negative, we'd like to talk about the fact that it's probably a little difficult to bring in new players, the actual elements of cooperation in this co-op game, and finally the length of play. So starting with bringing new players in, Vantage is a game that has a different experience on play 1 versus play 6. And that's because of your discovery and your experience and knowledge of the world. So it actually makes it, not in the sense of rules or anything like that, but in terms of the experience, quite tricky to bring in new players with experienced players. And what I mean by this is that I think it's going to be quite difficult to get 1 or 2 new players in a group of experienced players, and not have those experienced players almost ruin the experience in some way, because so much of this is the discovery and learning how to act. And I think it will be quite hard to not kind of allude to or lead on or just almost quarterback on how you should do things and how the world works. And that's kind of taking the experience away from those new players. And then even if you don't, you have kind of very different levels, and it can be a bit frustrating to new players where, and I've seen this, you have experienced players who have a full grid of equipment, and then you have the new player who's basically wandering around in a field with a rock going, how did you get all that stuff? What am I doing wrong? Now, I should say this is nowhere near as bad as some other games, including People Later, but it's just a consideration. Turning to the cooperation, even though Vantage is a game that goes up to 6 players, often the missions and destinies will very obviously not require a group effort. And sometimes it's very clear that only a single player will be the one who completes the mission for the group. And the problem is, this then leaves the rest of the players, in a sense, bumbling around directionless, because they can't really do anything to contribute to your overarching goal. So you really need to have players in that sense who are okay creating their own drives and their own goals. And in a similar manner, because you're all spread around this planet, cooperation is really very limited in this cooperative game. And I believe that in the future, Vantage is going to be seen primarily as best as a solo player game. Lastly, to touch upon the playtime, we've mainly played at 2, sometimes at 3, and our average play length is about 3 hours. But one time we did end up having a session that took 5 or 6 hours before we completed our mission. And the point here is that it's very difficult to predict how a session will go. And I think it's a very difficult proposition to bring this to a gaming night because you just don't know what's going to happen. And I think there'll be a lot of times where it ends very anticlimactically, where people just have to pack it away without really achieving anything or coming quite close to the goal, but people have to go. And that's going to be very unsatisfying unless you're the type of person who really is just all in it for the experience and it doesn't matter whether you achieve your goal. But there are other people, like say Tally, who definitely feels that there's some sort of wasted time element if you haven't achieved anything in the session within the game. So that's just something to keep in mind. But the point really is that this is a game which you want to be in a situation to leave set up on the table so you're prepared for anything if you do want to get that catharsis of completing a goal or a destiny. Final thoughts? Vantage is definitely a game we enjoyed playing. I don't think it's ever going to be something we are going to shout from the rooftops about. I don't even think it's our favorite type of exploration game. I personally prefer one with a more kind of story through line, but you can't deny that the mechanisms and the open world and the way you can go about doing whatever you want is a revelation. And the big question, as we've alluded to this whole review, is really you have to ask, is it what you want? Do you want that complete freedom, but you need your own drive to make adventure? Or do you need more of a push and more story? Because that is going to be the deciding line on who wants this and who thinks this is the most brilliant game of the year, and who thinks it's a complete miss, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. For me, narrative story games are just not my type of thing anyway. So you mentioned Sleeping Gods. I think that's fine. You're just more into that kind of thing than me because I lack imagination. I want everything to just be a little bit more tangible. But that said, I really enjoy the moment-to-moment gameplay in this. I enjoy trying to make everything fit together with using the different skills and how to kind of allocate the dice to your tableau. And I think it's also quite nice that it's cooperative, but you're not really working together turn to turn. So I felt like I had a lot of agency and autonomy with what I was doing, whereas a lot of other games like this can be a little bit like quarterbacking or telling the other person what to do. But then at the same time, it misses a little bit that you are really working on something together. There have been a few games where you went off and basically completed the mission and I was just like wandering around a little bit aimlessly.
Yeah.
So that's also just something to consider, a little bit of a pro and con. But on the whole, I did enjoy playing it.
Yeah, I very much are looking forward to exploring the world more, but it's just never going to be something we yell about, essentially. But that is our review of Vantage. Hopefully it was helpful. If it was, please consider liking, commenting, subscribing. Please ask us any questions you might have. And we appreciate you watching, and we'll see you next time. See ya.
Bye.